everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing fine.
All right.
Ready to take on the world.
Yeah, it feels like we have to every day.
So then we can go fishing.
Yeah.
Likely. Unlikely for me.
Me too.
Okay, I want to follow up on something I think you brought up yesterday. I thought it was very significant and has a lot of potential, even though we would assume, well, they're confirming what we thought. The whole world will join us, and they'll say, hey, the experts are now coming around. That has to do with the Danish study that said that, guess what, folks? These masks, it's a fake.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with protecting you. And the whole process is a hoax because it's not necessary to do this, which really throws the whole ball game up, because in a way the mask is symbolic of the lockdown, you know, with that and distancing and whatever. But they said that the lockdown and the mask, that we have to continue to do it. Matter of fact, there's been a tremendous increase. It's almost like they're reacting by being bullheaded. They're going to tell us it doesn't work. Well, we'll show them. We will really let them know we're going to really make these people wear masks, except for the people who write the rules.
Yeah.
The people who write the rules, the governors and the senators and all the promoters of all this mischief, they don't enforce the laws against themselves. So, but anyway, we see this, at least I do, I see this as very positive. The study was credible. It was so credible and so upfront and so honest, they suppressed it.
Yeah.
You know when they suppress it, why have they suppressed it? That's what really we ought to key in on. As soon as the internet, once they suppress a story or they blackball somebody, boy, we ought to have a special place for him, because the internet's big enough. And I think that will grow, and there's an attempt to do that there should be a place to go when the planners, take away the opportunity to go to the internet. But anyway, I think this is great, and it fits the scenario that we suspected was the truth. But of course, I don't think anybody in that study, and nor do we, say that why do we have medical masks? You think you'd throw them away and never use them again? Obviously not. And they even conceded in this study that you treat elderly people in nursing homes differently, and you treat patients who are under surgery differently. So it isn't one of these blanket statements, but it does mean that people who understand what's going on for mass acceptance of masks wherever we go is a little bit over the top. And of course, then that leaves for two solutions. That means, the government's job is to protect us from all dangers, and therefore we will turn our lives and our liberties over to the government. Or what we should do is just let people make up their own minds and find out what is the case. But I think we keep talking about this, but we're always hoping this might be a turning point. Yeah. And there are other things that we might mention today where it looks like there could be a turning point, more resistance. So let's hope that's the case.
The question that we would have, I think, is why not push for this in the first place? If the whole thing is about trusting the science, why were they so desperate to not allow an actual specific study on the use of masks to prevent the transmission of COVID-19 virus, or the coronavirus 19? Why were they trying, and once they did a test, why did they try to suppress it? Why did every single medical journal until yesterday refuse to publish this peer-reviewed study? And that's the real question. But it's called the unmasked study, and it took 3,000 participants, and it happened in the spring. It was a randomized controlled trial, which was produces the highest quality scientific evidence. What they did is they took roughly half, they gave them masks, and they instructed them on how to wear the masks, and they had to wear the masks. The other half just walked around and didn't wear the masks. These were before mask mandates. You could actually go ahead and do that. So after a month, they tested these two different groups with the PCR test and antibody tests and the lateral flow tests. And what they found is no statistical difference between the two groups. 1.8% of those with masks caught the virus, 2.1% of those unmasked caught the virus, but certainly within the realm of margin of error. So the effect of masks on spreading the disease is negligible. That's a conclusion that's backed by absolute scientific fact. And I was reading a piece in The Spectator by Professor Carl Hennigan, who's a professor of evidence-based medicine at Oxford University, and he said this is not really an anomaly. This mirrors previous studies of masks to prevent influenza-like illness. He said there have been 9 other mask studies that found that masks made little or no difference. So, why should this be any different? Well, they studied it and they found out that it doesn't, which is why we haven't been wearing masks for the last 30 or 40 years whenever there was a flu going around.
And you've already mentioned it, is why and how could we let them get away with silencing people who are trying to give us the right information? So here it is floating around, and it's not like it's just a political judgment. We're talking about science, and I think science has become politicized, and that's where the problem is. But that was Danish study, but I want to quote from a virologist from Canada, and this is just an article put out by Zero Hedge, and this doctor has credentials, and the Hedge article lists all his credentials. I won't go over them, but I believe he is authentic and he knows what's going on. His name is Roger Hodgkinson, and he's from Alberta, and he has a lot of degrees, and he's an expert in virology. But I just want to use something. He's strong, so he has to be cautious. He might not do well in the United States. Oh no, it couldn't be that bad, could it? Maybe he has to be careful in Canada too.
Yeah, really.
Well, okay, this is from the doctor. There is utterly unfounded public hysteria driven by the media and the politicians. It's outrageous. This is the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on an unsuspecting public, said the doctor. And so he doesn't mince any word. He says this whole situation's presented, quote, politics playing medicine, and that's a very dangerous game. Of course, that's what I've been trying to say for a long time. So there is no doubt in his mind how serious it is. And he's one that doesn't say that you get rid of all the masks and you get rid of all that, stuff. He's just saying that if it doesn't work, so he sort of confirms what the study said in Denmark. He was probably very much aware of that study. Okay, I will close with one last thing here. He says Hodgkinson also slammed mandatory mask mandates as completely pointless. Masks are utterly useless. There is no evidence base for their effectiveness whatsoever, he says. Paper masks and fabric masks are simply virtue signaling. So that's how he solves the problem. So we need more information like that. It's out there. They didn't just get smart a week ago, and those people doing that study, I bet they had a pretty good idea of the results. And of course, when they had their conclusion, they couldn't even get the information out. So yes, getting the truth out when there's a few others in the majority positions in the media and in the universities and the politicians and all this, it's very difficult. But that's the name of the game. This whole thing ends when they're exposed. Once the wizard is identified, boom, it's over and done with. So we want to keep getting after the wizard.
Well, they have always said, trust science, trust the scientists. Well, this guy is a scientist. What they really mean is trust the scientists who agree with me. So this guy, he's not a real scientist. He's only spent his whole career. Well, let's look through a couple of slides. And the first one is that study. If people want to look it up, it's pretty easy to find. Not light reading, I have to confess. I went to others to translate some of the information, but it's very interesting. But, Dr. Paul, the thing about this, even though when this comes out, the totalitarians, the authoritarians, the weirdos are still out there pushing people around. Let's look at the next clip. Speaking of weirdos, this is the health minister, the health Führer in Pennsylvania. Even though they found out that masks don't work, he's out there giving even more mandates. Here's the new one. You got to wear a mask in your house. Even in your own house. If someone comes over, now on you got to wear a mask even in your own house. And this minister, whatever it is, admitted this probably is not enforceable, but by golly, I'm gonna demand it anyway. And it's really incredible how they completely ignore the science. But this is nothing surprising to the viewers of the Ron Paul Liberty Report, who we value so much because we talk about it a lot. And let's look again at a few charts, because charts are a great way of understanding this. masks versus no masks. This is COVID cases per million via the COVID tracking project 7-day moving average. And you see it's coming all the way up into late November. Texas, masks, high. Florida, no masks, the same. California, masks, about the same. Georgia, no masks, about the same. The trajectory is about the same for all 4 states, regardless of whether you wear a mask or not a mask. Let's go to the next one. Again, this is, I think we've had this on before, but it's worth seeing again. Masks don't work. Should anyone be surprised? This is France. These are the different mask mandates. Inside, outside, everywhere. Look at the daily cases per million, over and over. And let's look at one more here. This is Minnesota and Florida. Florida, as you know, Dr. Paul, lifted everything September 25th. And look what happened to their daily new cases. Slight uptick as we move into winter. Look at Minnesota, forcing masks, closing the state. And look at this, way up there. And it's even worse in Minnesota, Dr. Paul. Look at this Governor Tim Walz. Let's look at this last one here before I switch over. The last one now, this is the governor of Minnesota yesterday. This is going to make you sick. Today we're asking Minnesotans to hit pause on social activities, in-person dining, sports, and gyms. What does that mean, hitting pause? That means that everyone who works at those has a pause in their paycheck, has a pause in their life, in their normal thing. He's not taking a pause on his paycheck, though.
Well, they should pause, on the regulations. But they're doing exactly the opposite. Yeah. The evidence is coming out. The people are sick and tired of them. More large number of people demonstrating. At the same time, the truth is leaking out by the scientists that this is and could be very well be a hoax. And guess what these officials do? Do you think they'd back off a little bit and maybe think about it, but they don't. They come down hard on it. We need more to the point where they become absurd, which I think I'd let them do it because I think they're losing ground. Well, we care so much about you and your family, and we know there's some handicaps about locking people down in their houses. Yeah, there's psychiatric problems and all these kind of things, but we care so much about them. We're going to get rid of Thanksgiving and Christmas, and maybe if Gates says, maybe next year. Yeah, maybe next year we can have Christmas again. But right now, you have to suffer for the sake of the common good. Yeah. That's disgusting.
Well, it really is. You talk about the people that are putting these rules on. It really does literally remind you of Animal Farm when you think about someone like Gavin Newsom. This isn't my original idea. Someone wrote it. But remember the great scene in Animal Farm where the pigs got to eat inside and all the other animals were sitting outside. Isn't that exactly Gavin Newsom and his gathering of pigs inside the French Laundry, one of the most expensive restaurants? A bowl of pasta, Dr. Paul, a little bit more expensive than Lake Jackson, $300 for one bowl of pasta. So,
well, that's good, as long as we get that information. And you'd first think that they couldn't be that hypocritical, but they are. And the other thing is, you think they'd be a little smarter. Oh, then they get up, and then they think all you have to do in this age, you get an embarrassment, and the crowd comes by. Well, he did this. He attempted to kill so-and-so and just wounded him. Oh, but let him apologize. Everybody can apologize, no matter what they do. They'll apologize. Yeah, a lot of people suffer, but I apologize. These apologies are, so unreal and not insincere. But that's what you do. You apologize and go on. But the only thing they're going to listen to is the people have to rise up. And, you can say, wait till the next election. Wait till the next election. Well, what if they steal the next election? Yeah. They got to do more than that. They got to do. You have to change the people's mind. The best election is conveyed when spontaneously a lot of people follow the leadership that's telling them the truth, and that's when they get out on the street and say enough is enough, and maybe then they get the attention. But so far, they realize they're on the defensive now, and so they're going to crack down even more. Yeah. Which doesn't make sense, but that'll work to our benefit because it's just going to get more people riled up about it. And I just think this whole thing, if the people don't care, we talked about the churches being closed down, and that was sad, and there was a lot of people just torn by that. But if all of a sudden, that they're going to have people coming in and enforcing these rules against Thanksgiving and Christmas, of course, we see some hope there too.
Yeah.
There's a couple sheriffs that doesn't want to do that. They don't want to do that and come and peek in your windows to find out how many people having Thanksgiving with you.
Do you remember that clip? They had the police peeking into Jewish schools in New York City to see if the Jewish kids were going to school because they were going to bust them. It's really insane. But we do have a little bit of good news on that front. And let's look at the next clip, actually. And because we talked about this yesterday, a couple sheriffs came forward and said, you know what, I'm not going to enforce Governor Cuomo's, if we have that next clip, I'm not going to enforce, let's go to the next one after that one. Sorry, we already covered this one. Governor Cuomo can't get sheriffs to enforce the 10-person cap on Thanksgiving dinner. He gave a crazy press conference yesterday where he was screaming at a journalist.
Oh, yeah.
Do you see that? It was nuts. You just asked him, hey, are schools going to be open or closed? And he spent a half an hour calling the guy an idiot, and it was amazing.
Daniel, I interrupt you for a
Yeah,
second,
no.
but because that is so great. Even liberal media was reporting this.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is over the top because all of a sudden they're trying to. We're not socialists. We're not this. We're good people. We're the middle of the roaders now because they're thinking about next year. So in some ways, there was a big change in the politics, and it was change at the grassroots and the House of Representatives. So that's what they're worried about, I'm sure.
He looked like a gangster, didn't he, up there?
Oh,
It was
yeah,
unbelievable.
keep him out there for a while. He's a good incentive to wake people up.
We'll put that up again because I want to just share the tears of Andrew Cuomo with everyone. If we can put him back up on the screen so we can all look at him. He says, this is not Deus Vult. He's kind of feeling sad. I don't believe as a law enforcement officer you have a right to pick and choose the laws you will enforce. Okay, but it's not a law, A. And B, it's really, for all of his bluster, it's really kind of a position of weakness, don't you think, to be up there so sad that they're not going to do what he tells them.
And if he sticks to his gun, we still have an alternative, and Martin Luther King understood it. It's nonviolence and it's resisting. Just don't follow, but you're nonviolent when they're enforcing ridiculous and unconstitutional laws on us. So yes, there are ways to do this. Of course, it is better if you can get enough people to change it, and there still are a lot of good people, not in Washington, D.C. so much as I think there's a fair number of people in the state legislatures that may be able to bring about more changes. But even that is a struggle because what they're bucking is a philosophic system that has been ingrained and embedded into our system for 100 years of the role of government. And the role of government is to make us safe and secure, and we're to make the world safe and secure, and we're never to complain about trying to leave some of those places.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to another topic. These are a couple of smaller ones, but really important to cover. Let's look at this next clip. This is in Wayne County in Michigan. Dr. Paul, I think you spent a little bit of time there yourself. The Trump campaign withdraws Michigan lawsuits after Wayne County certification reversal. Now, this seems a little kooky at first. There were 2 Republicans on the elections board. They initially refused to certify the election in Wayne County, Michigan. Immediately after they did that, they have signed affidavits. They were threatened with violence. Their workplaces were doxxed. They were threatened. Their families were threatened, and they became very, very fearful. And at the same time, the board said, okay, just sign these things, and we're going to have a full and independent audit of every vote. And I think the pressure of that and the promise led them to sign it. And then they woke up and the people said, well, we're just kidding. We're going to do an audit, but it's not going to be binding. It's just, So they rescinded it this morning. They said, we're actually not going to certify this. So that means that Michigan can't certify the election at this point unless something happens. And it's pretty interesting turn of events.
Sure is. It'll be interesting to see what actually happens there. But, in spite of my determination to find things to be optimistic about, I'm still not naive enough to believe that we can overcome, the judicial system, because you get things moving along. And just look at how the Republicans were trying to expose Russiagate, and they, who was in charge of the judicial system, their enemies.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the strange coincidence about this whole kind of weird audit of everything is that every time they discover glitches where votes weren't counted, they always go to Trump. You think that it'd be kind of half an hour, we messed up, Biden lost a few here, and they always seem to be in Trump's favor, which is interesting. And speaking of that, this is something Justin Hart has done some really good work on Twitter. Let's look at this next clip. He writes, check out this visual. So the New York Times keeps a log of every change to their presidential vote tallies. We believe they get their info from Dominion, which is the company that's under suspicion. Now check out the wild ride in Wisconsin, where Trump is leading by 51% all night until a dump at 3:42 a.m. 143,379 votes were dumped. You can see on that top level that massive, massive increase, 100% for Joe Biden. Wow, there must have been a lot of enthusiastic Biden voters out there at 3 in the morning. And you can see on the bottom chart how Trump in the dark was leading all night until that dump, and all of a sudden they switched places. If anything, this is an anomaly, and anyone who cares about fair elections, regardless of their political affiliation, should want to have this cleared up.
Yeah, it's going to be a tragedy if they can't get anywhere with this. You know, the the worst thing is if it's closed out and there's no credibility and no records kept. But they say you can't stop, which is a possibility. You can't stop the momentum of sticking this guy in, and his son will be his top advisor.
I'm sure.
And they will share the limelight. But you know, they do this, and they get away with it. But I think what you just described there, I don't want it to disappear. You know, they burn books when they don't want evidence, and it might be harder to burn this type of evidence. But they'll discredit it. Look how easy it was to discredit when people spoke the truth when they were trying to sort out what was going on with Russiagate.
Yeah.
I mean, they just totally ignored it, get another judge to rule something, and it was not a very good judicial system. And that to me is the most important. You know, and I think back about some of the major problems that we've had in our countries dealing with assassinations and other things. History's been pretty good at that, but sometimes it takes a long time to dig out the truth. So if you have to wait 10 years to people admit the truth about what they really did, it's in a way not very practical for the people who are suffering the consequences now.
Yeah, I think, you know, maybe a new independent media is brewing up, but I don't think it's strong enough now to challenge. But we want to do one little quick topic too, because, you know, it's been in the news, Dr. Paul, that President Trump is finally, a little bit late, but finally seeming to follow through with his desire to get troops out of Afghanistan and Iraq to a degree. And he's fired his defense secretary, who was not keen on it. He hired people like Colonel Douglas McGregor to get in there and start making things happen. And it looks like things are happening. They made an announcement. But this is, if anything, this is the perfect example of what you've always said about Washington. As soon as you actually start ending a war, you become demonized. And I have a couple of clips to demonstrate it, Dr. Paul. I know you're going to want to say something to address it. So look, here's the first one. This person is being touted as a potential political figure in the future. Let's hope he doesn't make it there. This is Representative Dan Crenshaw, who is, I believe, is Texas, right? Withdrawing troops rapidly might make some people feel better, but it won't be good for American security. We'll be right back in the same place as pre-9/11. No deterrence, no situational awareness, vulnerable to emboldened terrorists. I mean, it's just laughable. And let's look at this clip from Duckworth, Tammy Duckworth. This is a United States Senator, believe it or not. Here's what she had to say. No, it's the clip, actually, the Twitter clip. If you can play that video. Yeah, let's play her. And so where's Duckworth been for the last 20 years? They've been coming home in body bags because we shouldn't have been there. If you bring them home, they'll be coming home in body bags. No, they'll be coming home in C-130s, you know, back to their families.
If I had my way, they just wouldn't go.
Yeah.
And if I had my way, they ask, how do you do it? Where's the money? How long time this spent? They just marched in, just march out, you know. That doesn't seem too complicated. But what you're talking about here is a system, it's a philosophic system, and it's endorsed by the neoconservatives. And they're Republicans and they're Democrats, and they're in the deep state and they're in the Federal Reserve. The neoconservative movement is they have this patriotic zeal that we are protecting American interests. And all of a sudden you turn out, well, American interests, that means we have an empire. Yes, they believe in an empire. Is it an empire built voluntarily by free trade? No, it's an empire which is a military domineering empire. If people don't do what we say, we put on sanctions and we threaten people. And then you have these military people back up. And if you go behind the scenes, you find out that they're also very much involved in the military industrial complex. People make money, off wars. And sometimes they'll say, well, we'll have a little war, and we don't really want a war. We just want to build the weapons. And they do this for a precise reason, and they get away with it. But people have to remember it's not going well right now on adjusting what we do in Afghanistan. If there's anything wrong, it'll be Trump's fault. But guess who considered this the special war, the good war? A guy by the name of Obama. This is the good war, and he got the Nobel Peace Prize for saying this is the good war. Well, maybe we ought to back off Iraq for a while, but we have to go in there. But it's not hard. People have been going in there and invading Afghanistan and successfully suppressing the people for about 3,000 years like fun. They never have, and they never will. It's time. I don't even want them to leave 10 troops in there on purpose. We ought to just get out of there.
Every single one as quickly as possible. Well, I'm going to close down. I think we've probably exhausted ourselves, if not the topics. There's one thing I saw a tweet, Dr. Paul, and it showed Ron DeSantis and our own Governor Greg Abbott together in a tweet, and it said, Abbott and DeSantis both agree no more lockdowns. And again, this reminded me of Abbott, always preening, always pretending he's something he's not. What is he talking about, no more lockdowns? He still has Texas partially locked down. If you own one of the salons and he won't let you have a full capacity, you're locked down. If you own a bar that he won't let you have a capacity, you're still locked down. So him pretending that he's standing up as a big man and preventing the lockdowns is a total lie. DeSantis is the real deal. Abbott is a poseur. If he wants to not have a lockdown, he should end the lockdown and the mask mandate. A little bit of humor at the very end, Dr. Paul, because I'm getting myself worked up over here. My blood pressure is going to go through the roof. Let's look at this last clip if we can put it up. We had a teaser of it for a second on this Daily Mail clip. Daily Mail Online, builder 51 who died after falling from a 10-foot ladder was actually killed by coronavirus, doctors say. So that says everything you need to see about.
He was ducking from him or something.
So anyway.
The problem is that people put up with this nonsense and they go along with it. But the other problem I have is an economic problem, whether it's the economic system that we have, the Federal Reserve System, whether it's the downturns due to coronavirus, the bailouts, and all this. It always fits in to hurting the average person and the poor, much more so than the others, because the rich do get richer and the poor get poorer, but it's all done because we have so many humanitarians here and they're in charge. We have to, and believe me, all we have to say we're going to take care of the poor. And right now there's a few groups in this country that have been told that for years, but they don't seem to be doing so well and they're having some resistance. But that's the answer. As far as I'm concerned, the way you take care of the maximum number of people and having the largest middle class and the largest class of people with wealth, you have to have a free society, you have to have sound money. And that's what we don't have, but nevertheless, we run into these problems like we have, and the coronavirus, that's a serious problem. We have to do this, spend, and yet here we're reciting reputable scientists that say it's probably a hoax, it's way overblown, but that's the excuse. And guess what? These people, and you mentioned I think once today, people losing jobs. Who are they? Are they the rich losing jobs? No, it's the poor people. It's these small business people. It's not just the laborer that will lose his job, but it will be the person trying to get ahead, trying to leave this one group of income people to move over and build a business, and that's the way America's been built. Everybody has a right to start businesses. Just think of how many small businesses, we've seen the statistic, that have been closed down in this past year, and most people are saying not even half of them are going to return. And that is so destructive. So when you have these do-gooders get in there and say, well, let's just print more money, and the same way with war. Who suffers from the war? The people who goes over and aggravates the situations and brings about this antagonism and start bombing people and sending troops around the world. No, they never suffer. They don't have to go and carry a gun. But somebody who may be in the service, in the Middle East, I've read so many cases of single women sometimes were in the service because they figured, well, it's patriotic to do that. And besides, I can't even take care of my kids, so I'm going to get in. And they go over and they have suffered the consequences. So that's who really suffers from government intervention, because when you permit government intervention, you have to have the elites who get in charge of the intervention. People say, well, just get rid of those bad people who are in charge. It doesn't work that way. The people, the whole system invites the kind of people who are willing to grab power and use it to enhance their power and pretend they're saving the world. There's a better way, and it's called peace and prosperity through personal liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.
All of the military commanders have spoken up and said this is the wrong thing to do. We want our troops home, but let's not bring them home in body bags. And that's potentially what's going to happen if this president gets his way and puts his own political timeline ahead of our national security. All of the military commanders have spoken up and said this is the wrong thing to do.